Thank you so much, Jaden. In the last year or so, Jaden has finished up at Columbia, recovered on an expedited timeline from an AstroTurf-related knee injury, and been to Baku, Azerbaijan, where she represented us superbly at the latest conference of the parties. And by the way, her season, she had an excellent season and seems to be a very disruptive middle infielder. And I'm just really blown away and impressed and proud of everything that Jaden's accomplished this year. So great work, Jaden. It's amazing what people can do, and they work really hard. And our next presenter, also somebody who's really, I think, just taken on this project with a lot of independence and maturity and self-determination, and found an opportunity to do something that was both interesting and value congruent, and also, very importantly, I strongly suspect that work like this is part of our calling, is our calling, a big part of our calling as a program, work that's going to actually implement and possibly change policies. So Skylar Windnagle, changes and opportunities for green bin participation in San Diego County. Skylar.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Skylar, and today I'll be talking about challenges and opportunities for Senate Bill 1383 and residential green bin participation in San Diego County. I'm very passionate about food systems and how we can make them more sustainable and equitable, which brought me to this topic on Senate Bill 1383, which is California's goal to reduce short-lived climate pollutants such as methane by reducing the amount of food surplus that is sent to landfills. It was implemented in 2022, and it's a part of larger goals in California to create more circular food economies and more circular economies in general. It's an ambitious goal that includes diverting 75% of organic waste from landfills and increasing the recovery of edible food by 20% by this year, 2025. And we have not yet reached those goals, but we are actively working toward it. So this is a food system diagram to kind of better our understanding of all the parts that SB 1383 can affect. So it starts all the way on the left, food production, then it goes to processing, distribution, and consumption. From there, it can either be diverted to food recovery efforts or towards disposal or other waste management methods. I'd like to point out that within every process of the food system, there's an opportunity to divert it towards edible food recovery or to dispose of it. Within food disposal, which is really the main focus of this project, there are different waste management methods that people do, and most commonly, which is what SB 1383 is trying to change, people will put their food scraps in the waste bin, which sends it to a landfill, or down the sink. And both these processes are linear. It means that these food scraps won't be recycled. However, SB 1383 is really trying to change behavior so that food scraps either are sent toward composting facilities so that they can be reused in the food system, or towards an anaerobic digester where the organic material is broken down and the methane produced from that process can be used as an alternative fuel source, or the digestate used from it can be used as fertilizer and such. So SB 1383 specifically targets edible food recovery, organics recycling, and compost procurement, which is really ensuring that the different jurisdictions actually procure and use the compost that they helped contribute to. So because SB 1383 is such a big piece of legislation, I really had to focus this project specifically on organics recycling, and even more specifically on the individual role when it comes to organics recycling. So how can we encourage people to put food scraps in a green bin or toward a home composting system? This is a particularly challenging thing to do in San Diego County, which is the second most populous county in California and the fifth most populous county in the nation. That means it requires an extensive amount of education, outreach, infrastructure, and funding to make sure that we can change people's behavior in a way that's successful and critical to SB 1383's success. Primarily, this project looks at the most prominent barriers that individuals face when it comes to participating in green bin programs so that we can find ways to overcome those barriers. I could not have done my research without my amazing committee, which includes my committee chair, Dr. Amy Lerner, who's an urban studies and planning professor here at UC San Diego, and Natalia King-Quick, who's joining virtually. She's a sustainability and environmental justice liaison for San Diego County. My research methodology required 2 data sets, the first being interviewing San Diego County experts. I interviewed 9 experts, including officials from the county, the city, nonprofits that are focused on edible food recovery and recycling, and academics. I asked these experts 2 questions. One, when looking at SB 1383 in our food system as a whole, like that diagram I showed earlier, what are the main barriers to implementing that policy? And 2, when focusing specifically on organics recycling, what are the main barriers that individuals face when it comes to participating in green bin programs or home composting? The second data set I had was surveying San Diego County residents. The survey questions asked residents, 1, where do you put your food scraps? And 2, if you don't put your food scraps in a green bin or toward a home composting system, why not? How I distributed these surveys was canvassing 3 business parks in San Diego County, 1 in Carlsbad, the 2nd in Torrey Pines, and the 3rd in Ocean Beach. And the reason I chose to survey this way is it allowed me to meet a high diversity of people with different backgrounds, living in different cities, different socioeconomic statuses, different jobs, different sectors. However, I will say the limitation in this survey sample type, or this survey sampling style, is that my populations were largely skewed towards these sample sites, which are coastal and primarily north, and targeted mainly working age adults. So this survey really served as more of an exploratory instead of a representative sample survey. However, it gave really interesting initial exploratory insights into resident attitudes towards green bin composting programs. Finally, I analyzed these 2 data sets and compared them to see where these 2 groups differ in perspectives and where they align, and how that can inform policy moving forward. So I'll talk about the first set of results, which were the interviews with experts. And that top question, or this top graph, shows the answers to that first question, which is, what are the main barriers to SB 1383 implementation in our food system as a whole? The data point I'd like to touch on is that green circled one, which says that the second most cited barrier by experts was resident green bin participation and education. And this really confirms this project's hypothesis that the role of the individual in waste management and the success of SB 1383 is really critical. So focusing in on that particular area, I asked experts, what are the barriers that residents face when participating in green bin programs? And this is what they said. The top most cited barrier that experts said was a lack of motivating education. So an education that's more than just what do people put in a green bin, and really more on why I should participate in a green bin program. And educating people on the benefits that they could see from participating in green bin programs could incentivize behavior change better than just a standard education on it. The second most cited barrier by experts was the ick factor, which is a colloquial term used by experts in this field, like everyone used the term ick factor, to describe the disgust and the discomfort people might feel when handling food scraps, whether that be the smell, the mess, pests it can attract. But yeah, ick factor was a big thing that came up throughout this project. And third, lack of resources for high-density residences. A lot of experts cited this as a growing problem, especially as San Diego County continues to grow in population, which means that we need to tackle the issue of maybe higher barriers for people in these household types, including more inconvenience challenges or a lack of resources, as we want to implement SB 1383 successfully not only now, but well into the future. So those were the interview results. Moving on to the survey results, the first question I posed to respondents was, where do you put your food scraps? And this pie chart shows the answers to that question. The orange slice shows people who only dispose of their food scraps, meaning they said they put it only in a waste bin or down the sink. The green slice shows people who only recycle their food scraps, meaning they home compost it or put it in a green bin. and the blue slice shows people who do a bit of both. As you can see, most people only dispose of their food scraps, and 73% of people do not regularly partake in a food scrap recycling program. So that's the behavior that SB 1383 is really seeking to change. However, I do want to highlight that it was really encouraging to see that more than a quarter of people recycle their food scraps, which was really surprising to me as SB 1383 was only implemented 3 years ago, so that's like a very good point in this data set that I wanted to highlight. And because of my discussions with experts mentioning that there might be a higher concern for people in high-density residences, I decided to further analyze this data into different household types. As you can see, disposal-only rates were much higher for people in high-density residences, such as townhouses or apartments, as opposed to single-family homes where waste management methods were more evenly distributed. So this indicates that there probably is a higher barrier for people in these household types, and that's something to explore further. So the second question I asked survey respondents was, if you don't use a green bin, why don't you use a green bin? And the top 3 mentioned barriers were a lack of green bin collection services. So their hauler doesn't provide a green bin dumpster, or they're not on a route for green bin collection. 2, a lack of designated food scraps, or a lack of a designated food scrap bin in the home. And 3, the ick factor. Respondents didn't necessarily know the term ick factor, so this combined people who said, like, I don't like the smell, I don't like the mess. There's a lot of manual citations of, like, I don't want to see maggots or flies. So I kind of combined all that into the ick factor, which remained a top barrier for residents. Again, I further divided this data into different household types to kind of see what barriers affect certain residences more. The one data point I want to touch on in this graph is the red bar, which is no green bin service. As you can see, it's the top concern for people in high-density residences. It's like the highest bar, as opposed to single-family homes where it's tied for third. So this does truly indicate that there is a lack of resources in these types of household types, and that's something to prioritize when seeking out better policies for SB 1383. Okay. So finally, to compare these two perspectives, comparing the perspectives was really interesting to see where they align and where they didn't, and it highlights the importance of how our perceptions are shaped by both our knowledge bases and the systems or the scale in which we're thinking. These perspectives did align on the ick factor, which remained in the top 3 barriers for both groups, which suggests that there's a need for education on best practices as well as infrastructure solutions that might mitigate the unpleasantness of collecting food scraps. Where they differed is in no green bin service and no designated food scrap bin in the home. So as mentioned before, although these were mentioned as the top 2 barriers by residents, they were actually mentioned the least by experts. And likely the difference between these perspectives is due to their different scales of thinking, whereas experts are thinking at a systematic scale and have a higher knowledge base, as opposed to residents who are more concerned with the everyday tangible obstacles that they face. So let's look at not having a green bin service. Experts likely view the lack of a green bin service as a temporary problem, since they're aware of efforts to expand hauler services county-wide. But for residents, it's an immediate problem that they just can't participate in a green bin program if they don't have a green bin. The second issue, not having an in-home food scrap bin, was actually pretty surprising to me to be listed as the second highest for surveys, because it's a relatively low barrier to overcome. Any container with a lid, such as a yogurt container or a Tupperware lid, can be used as an in-home food scrap bin, and that's likely why experts listed this low as well. However, this response might reflect deeper concerns about odor, cleanliness, or inconvenience. So maybe instead of not having this bin, they actually just don't want this bin. And that might actually align better with expert opinions on ick factor. However, this is purely speculative and would require further research to understand what truly shapes this perspective. These mismatches, as I mentioned earlier, reflect the different lenses of each group. Experts focus on systems and timelines while residents deal with daily practicalities. The best solutions for green bin participation will bridge these two perspectives together. So addressing infrastructure and access while also responding to residents' everyday challenges. This means pairing system-wide rollouts with tools, education, and behavioral nudges that support individual participation, specifically when it comes to green bin participation. So while talking to both experts and respondents, there are a few themes that came out in terms of solutions, including enhancing education, improving infrastructure, and centering community. In terms of enhancing education, some of the ideas that came out of expert conversations was incorporating composting in school curriculums, making educational tools more accessible and engaging, and using education to explicitly link green bin participation with realized benefits, such as environmental and climate improvement, as well as community health. In terms of improving infrastructure, really prioritizing those areas that lack infrastructure currently, such as edible food recovery, which was listed as the top concern by experts, along with implementing better infrastructure for high-density residences will be important. And finally, centering community. Incorporating community composters in SB 1383 efforts is going to be important, as SB 1383 is a really centralized process, but maybe localizing and decentralizing that process can also localize the benefits that people see, and in that way they're more invested in participating in green bin programs if they can see the benefits of the extra labor they put into separating their food scraps. So in conclusion, SB 1383 is a mandate in California that aims to reduce methane produced by food surplus in landfills. Individual behavior is going to be really critical for the successful implementation of SB 1383. And although experts and residents disagree on the most prevalent barriers to green bin participation, that's likely due to different skills of thinking and different definitions. The best solutions are those that bridge these two perspectives and focus on education, infrastructure, and centering community. And that's it.
Hi, great job.
Thank you.
I'm one of those people who lives in an apartment building that doesn't have access to a green bin, so I can't compost. I think like one issue for people like me is that their landlord may not be interested in investing and having a green bin, even if it's required. I think she knows it's required, but she just doesn't do it. What are some possible policies that could help enforce green bin implementation for people in living situations like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I also live in an apartment that doesn't have a green bin program, which is really interesting because I'm just throwing my food scraps in the trash and then later writing about how we should put it in a green bin. But what I have been doing is reaching out to my city local officials who are really in charge of making sure that the hauler provides a green bin. And there is a lot of reluctance to that. Maybe like the enclosure for your dumpster isn't big enough to add a third, or people don't want to deal with the extra service. So in terms of policies, I'm not sure, but with what you could do right now is just reach out to those local city officials, and they should start getting a petition to get a green bin in your complex. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the work you've done on this project. My question might be outside this, I think it is outside the scope of your project, but I've often wondered about what happens with unsold produce that's still usable at all our wonderful farmers markets around town. Do you know what does this legislation relate to that particular group?
Yeah, so SB 1383, it targets individual behavior, but also really business behavior. So it really wants businesses to also put food produce into composting or anaerobic digesting systems. I took a food class this quarter with my chair, Dr. Amy Lerner, and there's some people there who work in produce, and they say often, even though they're supposed to throw it in a green bin, it ends up in the landfill. So it's hard to measure and maintain oversight over like such a big program.
I just wanted to say that when you started this project, my complex did not have a green bin, and at some point they did get a green bin, and I was really excited, and then I realized that it smelled really bad, and my roommate was mad about the fruit flies. And when I brought that to you, you gave me the simplest solution. You were like, just keep the bin in the freezer. And so because of you, I have now been really good about composting my food waste. So thank you.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear it. I also want to shout out Skylar Ang, who's another Skylar in this program, also doing food systems, funnily enough, but she's presenting next. And she is focusing on food waste policies like SB 1383, but on a national scale. So I'm excited to hear that too.